Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yasodhanandana Brajajanaranjana Yasodhanandana Brajajanaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna. Welcome. I have this overwhelming desire tonight to speak about Srila Prabhupada. Is that all right? Jai Srila Prabhupada. In fact, I could probably start with how I met Prabhupada. Would you like to hear that? Yes. Okay. Well, I first saw the devotees on the television in 1969, I think it was. Top of the Pops. Top of the Pops was a weekly program where you could watch on television the top of 10 chart busters. And I was waiting for number one, who was going to be number one top of the Pops. And when they were invited on the stage, I got quite a surprise because they were not long-haired hippies with guitars and the normal pop drums, but they were shaven-head devotees with mridanga, kartals, and harmonium. And they started to sing Hare Krishna. And I was thinking, well, this must be a joke. because it was so unusual. It was so outrageously unusual. And but it was no joke. They were number one for 6 weeks. For 6 weeks I had to tolerate the Hare Krishna mantra. But little did I know at that time that actually the Hare Krishna mantra was entering into my heart and planting a seed. And in London at that time, just after the success of the single, George phoned the temple and said to the devotees, you have to come back. Our single was successful, so come back to the Apple Studios and we will record an album with many songs. And so that's what they did, and it was released. And one day I was at my friend's house. We were playing music and smoking dope and all that kind of stuff. And as I was leaving his house that evening, I saw this album on the table. I said, "What's that?" He said, "Someone gave it to me. If you want it, you can have it." So, in England, when something's free, you take it. Took it home and I played it. And I played it, and I played it, and I played it, and I played it, and I played it. And I realized I wasn't playing anything else but this album. And my favorite song was Govindam Hari Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Hari Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Hari Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Well, about 1 year later, I went to London to get a job, and I got a job as a company that was cleaning rich people's homes. So I got a job doing that, going to people's homes and cleaning their apartments. And one of the places I went to was Spike Milligan's house. Spike Milligan was very famous at that time. He was one of the Monty Python groups. George Harrison knew him very well. Though I didn't meet him, but I would speak to his wife, and she would tell me about their adventures in India. And I was quite fascinated listening to all the positive things about India. And then one day I saw the devotees on the streets chanting Hare Krishna. In those days, the devotees didn't have dhoti kurta like we have today, and a sari like we have today. What they did was they went to Marks and Spencer's. Do you have Marks and Spencer's here? No. Anyway, it's a popular shopping store. They went to the Marks and Spencer's and bought sheets and dyed them and used that as their robes, the ladies and the men. They dyed them yellow color. So they looked quite, different, very different. And your natural first impression is, wow, these people are crazy. Stay away from you. But then I noticed that they were out every day. And every day I would see them. And one day a devotee approached me with a magazine and an invitation to the Sunday love feast. So I took the magazine and I went into a cafeteria. In those days, if something hallucinated, then it was considered okay. So this magazine was full of pictures, devotees and Krishna, and there was a vibration coming that I really liked. So I decided, okay, well, the feast is free, so why not? So I went one Sunday. And I remember that the first time I opened the door from the street to the temple, and there was this, like this gust of spiritual atmosphere hit me right in the face. I was like, wow. And the smell of incense offered to the Lord. And there was also food cooked in ghee and spices. It was all very new to me, but fascinating. So there was a kirtan. I didn't really like the kirtan because it was a little bit too loud. You know, hippie means love and peace, you know. Anything that's too loud, although we didn't mind listening to our own music blasting out, but for some reason I didn't catch on to the kirtan right away, and neither did I understand the philosophy. It was way above my head. But when they put that feast plate in front of me, perfectly understood. And I can tell you the preparations that were on there. Because it was every week. I started coming every Sunday. Prabhupada said in the beginning, you should take as much prasad as you like, as is possible. You should walk away from the temple like a duck. You know. That's what I did for many weeks. So I'll tell you what was on. There was two plates. In fact, there was a salty plate and there's a sweet plate. On the salty plate, there was two sabjis cooked in ghee and spices. There was pushpan rice. Pushpan rice, I don't know if you ever had pushpan rice, but yeah, I don't see it nowadays. But pushpan rice is a rice that contains practically every spice you can imagine. Cheese balls, coconut wedges, cashew nuts, raisins, peas, and like that. Prabhupada said pushpan rice is a feast in itself. Then there was koftas, there was puris that puffed up, there was bharats, there was samosas, there was chutney, and raita, and a papadam. That was the salty prep. The sweet plate, halava, laddu, gulab jam, shrikand, sweet rice, and a nectar drink. That was a feast. They don't make them like that today. And you had to come back to try it again. It was not a question of, well, that was a good experience. Okay, I've been there and done it, as they say. I've been there and I'm going to do it again. That's what we said. It was irresistible. So I was coming every Sunday, and then one devotee one day said, "Oh, you like our food?" I said, "Yeah, it was really nice." And he said, "Well, why don't you come for lunch too?" I said, "Well, why not?" So I came for lunch as well. So for 3 months, practically speaking, 3 months, every single day I came to the temple just to take prasad. Of course, at that time I didn't know it was prasad. I didn't know what prasad was. For me, it was just good food. But one day I was on the top of a double-decker bus, because in England you have top deck and lower deck. I was on the top deck and there was no one up there. And I suddenly, without any desire or even thinking of it, I started to chant. And I was somewhat surprised. Why am I chanting? And it was almost as if there was something inducing me to do it. And that evening, I was chanting all evening. And I just couldn't stop. It was just overwhelming. So the next day, I came back to the temple and I said to the devotees, I have a problem. And they said, well, what's your problem? I said, I keep chanting your mantra and I can't stop. And they laughed too. They said, do you know what you've been eating the last 3 months? Well, good food. He said, Krishna, prasad is Krishna. Krishna is prasad. He said, you have eaten so much prasad that you have purified your tongue. And now Krishna is personally dancing on your tongue, inducing you to chant his names. So that's how I became a devotee. The power of just taking prasadam. Just taking prasadam is a yoga feat. What other yoga system can you perfect your life by eating? Only in Bhakti Yoga. Because only in Bhakti Yoga do you offer your food. So just by eating, we're making spiritual advancement. It's also said about that in regards to the Holy Dham. If you go to generally the first time you go to the Holy Dham, you usually get sick. It's just Krishna's way of slowing you down. We're coming from the West, we're full of passion. And to really appreciate the Holy Dham, sometimes Krishna needs to slow you down. And the way he does it is to get you become sick. But it doesn't matter, because even lying down in the Holy Dham sick, even if you're sick, lying down sick, it is said it's like paying obeisances to the Holy Dham. So you may come back from your 3-week trip to the Holy Dham and someone will ask you, so how was your trip? Oh, wonderful. So what did you do? Well, I was sick for 3 weeks, but it was really ecstatic. This is how spiritual life is like that. It just affects you in a very profound way, enters your mind and heart in a very special way. So, one day there was a devotee preaching to me. He was on the stairs leading up to the ashrams, And I was just standing there. You have to try to imagine me with long hair, beard, a hippie, mustache, beard, the whole works. Longer hair than yours. And, we were thinking that, we're either God already or we'll at one point become God. That was as Prabhupada would say, the last snare of Maya, to think that you're God. So this devotee was preaching to me, and suddenly he bowed down right in front of me. And I was thinking, wow, this guy really understands me. And when he got up, he said, "Did you see my spiritual master?" Because on the first floor, Prabhupada's room was on the first floor, but the bathroom was not attached. It was separate, so you had to walk along the corridor to go to the bathroom, and that was why he was bowing down. Of course, I was a little disappointed. It wasn't me. And he said, "And you can come and listen to him tonight. He's giving a Bhagavad-gita class. It starts at 7:30. So because I was a hippie, and generally we didn't have any concept of time, I arrived at the temple something like 8 o'clock. Prabhupada was already giving the class. As I walked in, if you can imagine walking in from this side, and Prabhupada was on the left and the deities were on the right. And it was a very small temple, it wasn't very big. I would say maybe where you're sitting, Prabhu, that was the size of the temple. Maybe a little bit more, not so wide. Maybe here. Anyway, the temple was packed. So I was thinking, well, there's Prabhupada, and I went to sit next to the deities, as far away from Prabhupada as possible. And as soon as I sat down, I started to become very offensive to Prabhupada. I looked at him and I was thinking, why are all these young people listening to this old man? Because one of the things the hippies believed in was that we were going to start a new generation in consciousness. We were going to start a new revolution in consciousness. The older generation had done nothing to the world. It had gone through 2 world wars, and still they were fighting with each other. And that was our philosophy, that we were going to make the change in the world. So as I was thinking like that, at some point devotees started looking back in my direction. I couldn't really figure out why they were looking at me. Well, this went on for at least 5 minutes until I realized what the problem was. And the problem was that I hadn't changed my socks in about 8 or 9 days. And my feet were smelling quite bad. So bad that the head pujari, she got up. She didn't light one incense stick. She had a whole bunch of them in her hand. She lit the whole bunch just to counteract the smell of my feet. And after Prabhupada's class, he left and went up to his room. And one devotee came up to me, he said, "Do you want to come back here again?" I said, "Yeah, why not? can you please change your socks before you come? So I said, okay. So that was my first instruction. From that day on, I've had clean feet, clean socks. And that's what happens when you come in contact with the pure devotee. There's me thinking I was better or greater than Prabhupada, and the whole thing went back in my face. You know, I couldn't even wash my feet properly, what to speak of changing the world and helping with a new revolution in consciousness. So that was my first encounter with Srila Prabhupada. I started to come regularly to the temple and started to appreciate more the philosophy and kirtans. But then one day a devotee approached me. He said, "What would you like to do with your life?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to be like you. I'd like to be a devotee. But I have one last desire." And he said, "Oh, what's that?" I said, "I want to go to India to see if this is true." And he said, "Don't waste your time. India has already come to you. Don't waste your money or your time. Just join the temple." And I said, "No, this is something I've got to do. It's a burning desire within my heart. I have to find out if this really is the truth." So he said, "Okay, well, we'll see you when you get back." And in those days, you could hitchhike practically everywhere. I hitchhiked all the way down to Istanbul. In Istanbul, there were lots of hippies going to India at the time, and you could take different rides on buses and cars. And so I got as far as Afghanistan. I was so close, so near to India, but so far away at the same time, because in the association of the hippies, I started to take up drug taking again. I had already finished with all of that. I had become a vegetarian, I stopped taking drugs, everything. But in the association of the hippies, then it all started coming back, the previous activities of hippies' life. And I was in this hotel, and I was really, really in a bad way. And one day I looked out of the window, and I saw these big, huge rats, and suddenly the philosophy came, slapped me right in the face. And I recalled the fact that if you don't perfect your human life, and then especially if you become degraded in the human form of life, you can even take a lower birth in your next life. And what to speak of maybe becoming even a rat. And that really, really hit me for six. There and then I decided to return back to the West. I came all that way, but then I realized, well, even if I do go to India in this frame of mind, what am I going to learn? Are the hippies going to take me to Vrindavan? Hardly not. So I was in the wrong association. So I decided to return, and I went back to London, and I remember I was at my sister's house for 1 week before going to the temple, and I drew one picture of Mahavishnu from the Sri Ishopanishad. There was a wonderful picture of Keshava Vishnu, and I did a painting of that Keshava Vishnu, Lord Keshava, and I brought it with me to the temple, and they were very happy to receive the painting and welcomed me to the ashram. So that painting remained on the wall for many years. Because in those days, if anyone could do anything, it was really appreciated. So I wasn't really an artist, but I had a good go at this. I think Krishna helped me with this painting, and it was on the Prasadam wall. So like that, that's how I joined the temple. And I got initiated in 1972 at the London Rath Yatra Festival. The day after the initiation, we were asked to go out and collect some Guru Dakshin. Because in those days, of course, there were no Grihastas. We couldn't take Guru Dakshin from the Grihastas. We had to actually go out on the street. And we were quite honest about what we were doing too. We would approach people and say, "Excuse me, sir, but I just got initiation yesterday, and just to show my gratitude to my spiritual master, I want to give him some Guru Dakshin. Could you please help me?" And they would go, "Guru what?" Like that. So anyway, at the end of the day, it was at least 9 of us got initiated at that time, and at the end of the day, we put our money together, and the next morning we were, after breakfast, we were ushered up into Srila Prabhupada's room. As we entered the room, we paid our obeisances, but Prabhupada was facing the other direction. And then after a few moments, he turned around, and as he turned around, we paid our obeisances again. We offered the Guru Dakshin, Srila Prabhupada, in appreciation for giving us initiation. We want to offer you this Guru Dakshin. And then we paid our obeisances again. And then Prabhupada said to his servant, "Give them Mangalarti sweet." So when he said that, we paid our obeisances again. And when we had the sweet in our hand, we didn't really know whether to eat it there or keep it in the hand and respect it outside. We ended up just paying our obeisances again. And Prabhupada was watching us, because I guess it was quite funny. These British boys and girls keep bowing down before him. I mean, because generally speaking, as British people, we're usually very proud, by nature. We have our nose up in the air, and some of us even speak down the nose. What? So Prabhupada was very amused, and he said, "Oh, thank you so much." And then we paid our obeisances again. And then we staggered out of the room, and within, a space of 4 minutes, we probably paid our obeisances about 8 or 9 times. I said to the servant outside the room, I said, "Well, we really made a mess of that, didn't we?" And he said, "No, on the contrary, it was perfect." He said that a disciple should feel like a fool in front of the spiritual master. If he thinks himself anything other than that, then he really is a fool. So he said he did very well. One morning on a morning walk in St. James's Park, it was a cold morning, and it was so cold that the ice, the water puddles had turned into ice. So in England we get a lot of rain, and then when it gets cold, all the puddles in the park turn to ice. So Prabhupada, he was doing something very unusual, which we've never really seen him do before, because usually on a morning walk he was usually very conservative. He would sometimes talk something, but other times would chant. This particular morning he had his cane and he was going to each of the puddles of ice and cracking them. And he would go to the next one and hit his cane on the ice puddle. And then at one point he came to one puddle and he said, "What does this mean?" And one devotee said, "Well, it's ice, Prabhupada." And Prabhupada said, "Well, I know it is ice, but what does it mean?" So we were kind of looking at each other. We didn't know what to say. And then suddenly Prabhupada said, "Ice is Maya." He said the natural constitution of water is liquid, but when it comes in contact with freezing weather, it turns into ice. Ice is slippery and very dangerous. So he gave this analogy. In the same way, our hearts are naturally very soft. But when we've been associating so long with Maya, the heart becomes hard, just like the ice puddle. It's not natural. And he said, he went further to the analogy. He said that later this morning the sun will rise and it will melt the ice and it will go back to its natural constitutional position, liquid water. He said in the same way, if you take seriously this chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, your hearts will also soften. It's such a wonderful analogy. And I never really forgot that. And I was always reminded of this analogy, and really kept me inspired throughout my spiritual life, that I knew as long as I was chanting every day, Prabhupada wanted us to chant at least 16 rounds every day. Because the 16 rounds of japa is sufficient to keep us above the free modes of material nature. That we can be like a lotus flower. A lotus flower, a lotus plant is born in the mud, but it flowers even above the water. So we're born in the mud of Kali Yuga. Lord Chaitanya picks up the most fallen first. First he picked up Jagai and Madhoi. Then he picked us up, us hippies. We did all the wrong things so that today you can do the right things. We were the guinea pigs of Krishna Consciousness. We paved the way for the future. We made a lot of mistakes. But I'm sure Lord Chaitanya was very forgiving, because of our, wretched past. So he forgave us, and he just inspired us, guided us nicely. So this is my own personal experience, that because I've maintained that principle, that 4 regulative principles in chanting 16 rounds, this has kept me afloat within Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada said also that if you chant your 16 rounds by 10 o'clock in the morning, you'll have no anxiety throughout the day. I will repeat that because it's very important. If you chant your 16 rounds by 10 o'clock in the morning, you will have no anxiety throughout the day. So what does that mean? It means that after chanting 16 rounds, you are transcendentally situated like the lotus flower. And this world cannot affect you. So regular maintenance of 16 rounds will keep you protected from the onslaught of the free modes of material nature. Srila Prabhupada at one point asked if some of his devotees his disciples could come to India. There was a need for more devotees there. And I volunteered to go. And I was thinking, well, anything's better than staying in London. Let me go to India. But little did I know what I was actually putting myself into, because India wasn't that easy either. I was at the second Mayapur festival. The first Mayapur festival was in 1972. There were 20 devotees. In 1973, there were 200 devotees, and Prabhupada also invited his godbrothers. And during the Gaur Purnima celebrations, he allowed his godbrothers to speak. And like that, it was his way of showing his godbrothers, his disciples and his mission. Of course, he also asked Malati to serve prasadam to them. And some of the sannyasis kind of disapproved of that. And Prabhupada noticed that. But then he said, yes, Malati Devi Dasi, she would cut her throat for me, and I would cut my throat for her. Basically informing them that as far as I'm concerned, she is not a woman, she's a Vaishnavi. And she's a very sincere devotee. Because of course Prabhupada made a lot of changes from the ways of the Gaudiya Math, where he allowed women to stay in the temple in the brahmacharini ashrams and giving Gayatri to women. It was not known before, so there was a few of the godbrothers who were disenchanted with the changes that Prabhupada made. And I think they wanted to kind of demonstrate a little bit. But Prabhupada was unruffled. He remained firm in his own personal realizations of spreading Krishna consciousness. Anyway, on a morning walk there in Mayapur during that time, Prabhupada suddenly stopped and he said, "This is my international headquarters." Well, that was something we couldn't understand either, because we only had one building. It was the Lotus building. It had hardly been completed. And the rest of the property, the land that we acquired there in Mayapur, was just paddy fields and one path leading to the gate entrance. So here's Prabhupada saying, "This is my international headquarters." And we were thinking, what's Prabhupada talking about? And it was just something we could not relate to. But of course, Prabhupada had transcendental vision, and he knew the future of Krishna consciousness, how everything will emanate from Sridham Mayapur. And we have no doubt today in recognizing that fact that Sridham Mayapur is our international headquarters. Does anyone have any doubts about that? No. So many devotees are coming now each year to the Navadvip Parikram. I think it's divided up into 3 or 4 groups. So many devotees. At that time, the GBC were in the rooms, and GBCs and sannyasis were in the rooms. And the other devotees were on the veranda. They would have their sleeping bag, and that's how we, for 10 days, we were celebrating Gaur Purnima, and that was how we slept at night time, outside the rooms on the veranda. But we didn't have any idea of the fact that there were going to be mosquito bites. We would be inundated every night by mosquitoes. We had no mosquito nets, and it was really, really heavy, very, very difficult. In my own case, I had bites all over my feet, and I was scratching them. I didn't know that if you just tolerated a few minutes, the itch would go away. I was scratching and scratching and scratching, and then my feet started to swell. I had to go to the local hospital outside. It was just a room where there was a doctor. He got his needle, which was completely blunt, gave me an injection, which I practically fainted. And those were the days where life in India was so tough. But always something that I remember as being very pleasant at the same time. Hardships to perfection. Actually, in spiritual life, the harder it is, the more blissful it becomes. The opposite to material life. We want everything to be hunky-dory, perfect in every way. So I got more and more sick. I was there for 6 months. And then one day, the temple president, I think it was Bhaktivedanta Swami, he called me up to his room and he said, "You better go to Calcutta because we don't want any dead bodies around here." So I left for Calcutta. I recuperated a little bit. And then I went to Delhi. I decided to do some preaching in Delhi, and I joined Tejas, who had a house in, I think it was Punjabi Bagh or somewhere like that. And but the summer was coming in really, really fast. And I had no idea what the summer would be. No idea. My problem is my bodily temperature is already very, very high. I can take any amount of cold, but heat I cannot actually tolerate. Too much heat. I was just recently in Canada, and there was really nice, cool weather there. 18 degrees below. And I was melting the snow as I was walking along. So it was getting hotter and hotter and hotter. I just couldn't believe it. When is this heat going to stop? But it didn't stop. It got hotter, hotter as the days passed. And one day I said to Tejas, I need to go back to the West. And he said to me, well, who's going to do your service? Until you find someone to do your service, how can you go? And one of the problems about coming to India in those days was that the condition was that you could go to India on the condition it was a single ticket. In other words, you could get to India, but there was no return ticket. So I was trying to persuade Tejas to give me a ticket back to London, but he wouldn't have it. So I tolerated it for another 2 weeks, and then I negotiated with the head Bajari. I said, I need to get back to the West, so I'm going to go overland. So he helped me escape from the temple that night. Because Tejas' room was on the ground floor, and I couldn't go via the ground floor, so I had to come over the balcony on the first floor. So we tied some sheets together and lowered me down. And then he lowered my back down. And then I was off to the train station, and my first stop was Amritsar. Amritsar is a golden temple, Sikh temple, which I stayed for about 5 days. In that temple you could take prasad every day. It was nice. But then I had to start my journey. The first stop was Pakistan. And in Pakistan, the only thing I could eat was Coca-Cola and biscuits. That was, that was my lot. There was no vegetarian restaurants like in India. You could go to a restaurant and take some sabji and chapatis. In Pakistan, there was no vegetarian restaurants. And there was no way I could cook or anything. It was very, very difficult. And I got to Iran, and in Iran, it was a little bit better. I could get some bread and cheese and some olives. And then from Iran, I went to Afghanistan, Iran, and then down through Turkey to Istanbul. By the time I got to Istanbul, I was diagnosed as having hepatitis. And I was informed by the doctor that I had to stay in a quarantine hospital for at least 2 weeks. So I was in the hospital and still eating bread, cheese, and olives. That was my daily diet. After 2 weeks, the doctor came and diagnosed me again, and he said, well, your hepatitis has not cleared up sufficiently for you to be able to leave the hospital. You'll need to stay for another 2 weeks. So that night I had to escape from the hospital. I went under the reception desk and sneaked out, ran down the road. So then I phoned my father. I said, like, I'm stuck in Istanbul. Can you send me some money so I can take a train back to London? So he did that. And by the time I arrived in London at Bhaktivedanta Manor, no one could recognize me. I was skin and bone, like some refugee or coming from some concentration camp somewhere. So those were the kind of days where things were very much more austere. The facilities weren't like today. There are so many facilities today. There's no room for complaints today. To complain today it's just, for us, it's just bewildering. How can you possibly complain? You have so many facilities, so many opportunities to become Krishna conscious. So in those early days, we were just laying even the foundation of Krishna Balaram Mandir. We were just laying the foundation. I remember before going to Delhi to meet Tejas, I was in also Vrindavan, and Guru Das was there, and I remember Guru Das, he had to preach to us and encourage us, and he was like our father. We only had the foundation, so our living was in simple facilities, makeshift. So, the next time I met Prabhupada was at the Rath Yatra in 1973. He came, and so we made a very big arrangement for the Rath Yatra festival. We put up thousands and thousands of posters all around London. So it was well attended. And in the beginning of the procession, we were waiting for Prabhupada's car to arrive. And I remember I was leaping in the air. I was so young and healthy, and I felt like Narada Muni, leaping in the air in ecstasy, chanting with the devotees. However, as I was leaping at one point, I came down, and I came down on one lady's pushchair. She had a child in a pushchair, and I twisted my ankle, and I was on the floor in agony. So one devotee said, well, you better get up on the cart. And I thought, wow, on the cart? What a blessing. I'll be up there with Lord Jagannath, and I will be there right next to Prabhupada. What could be better? So I got up there. Bhaktivedanta Swami, he was the local Swami at the time, he was leading kirtan up there. So there was just me and him. But then when Prabhupada arrived, he decided not to go up onto his Vyasasan. He wanted to dance through the streets of London. So he danced all the way from Marble Arch to Trafalgar Square, which took at least 2 hours. And you may have seen this video of Prabhupada dancing. Have you seen it? Yeah? Yeah. And there's devotees kind of protecting him. And there's me up on the cart. Because he told even Bhaktivedanta Swami, come down, kirtan down here. So then I was up there on the cart, alone, lamenting my misfortune of not being next to Prabhupada, dancing through the streets of London. Later that year, Prabhupada also went up to Scotland, and I was up there. No, I hadn't gone there yet. Yeah, he went to Scotland. There was a program in Glasgow called Mary Hill. And Mary Hill is Glasgow was the worst city in the UK. And within the UK, Mary Hill area was the most degraded area. And in that place, Tribhuvannath, one of my godbrothers, he rented a hall in Mary Hill. And Prabhupada came and he led kirtan, gave class. And after the class, he stood up and started chanting, and everyone stood up and chanted with Prabhupada. And they were chanting like as if they were already devotees. And Prabhupada passed remarks after the program that they were demigods in their last life. Something like that. But it was a wonderful program. And then at one point I was asked to go to Sweden. It was just, yeah. It was September of '73, I think it was. And so I made my journey to Sweden, and Prabhupada was about to arrive there too. So I was very fortunate to be there right as Prabhupada arrived. His first program was in Uppsala University. But in Uppsala University, there were very controversial students there. And in Prabhupada's lecture, he was talking about first-class man, second-class man, third-class man, fourth-class man. He was explaining how there are different classes, there are distinctions between people. But the students didn't like this class at all. Suddenly one student stood up. So, Swami, are you first-class man or what? And Prabhupada he really took a very, very humble position and he said, no, I am actually fifth-class man. I am lower class than you. And because, when the challenge was, when this person stood up and challenged Prabhupada like that, there was a lot of cheers and cheering. But when Prabhupada said, no, I'm actually fifth-class man, I am lower than you, then there was complete silence in the hall. Just one line, he silenced them all. But he didn't want to continue the class, so he just told the devotees, have kirtan. And so there was a rip-roaring kirtan, but there was some expectation that there would be some trouble as Prabhupada would leave the hall. So we were very protective of Prabhupada as he left. But luckily nothing happened. Yeah. So he was in Sweden for about 4 or 5 days. He did some whole programs in Stockholm. And that was my beginning years in Scandinavia. I was in Scandinavia for a total of 15 years. So I spent 5 years in Sweden and 7 years in Finland. What, am I supposed to finish somewhere along the line? Sorry, I'm getting carried away here. Where's the temple president? It's up to me. You tell me. Should I carry on or not? I don't mind. I can continue with Prabhupada if there's any other opportunity another day. Is that okay? Srila Prabhupada ki. Chanting 16 rounds every day ki. Going back home, back to Godhead ki. Jai Gaur Premanande.